Hello there. Welcome to the Scruffy Looking Nerders podcast. This week's episode is another special episode, as it's totally not another Avengers Endgame review that you're gonna see on every other podcast. Just kidding, it is. So first up, real quick, I have some housekeeping for you guys. Next weekend I will be at Visioncon in Springfield, Missouri. It's almost here. I am completely stoked for this. I'm hoping to get some great footage, some interviews, and showing what makes this convention one of my favorites. Secondly, and lastly, I will go ahead and announce that I will also be at GameCon in Springfield in October of this year, but more on that once it gets closer. So, I'm going to preface this episode with, I cried tears of joy, tears of sadness. I laughed, I cheered. I probably felt almost every emotion on the emotional spectrum watching this movie. But anyway, I totally missed the intro. This is the Scruffy Looking Nerders podcast. I am the host, Tyler, bringing you news on all things nerd and geek related. Thank you for joining me on this special episode that is the Avengers Endgame review episode. The first part is going to be spoiler free, yeah. So if you're on the fence for whatever reason on seeing this movie, you can get a spoiler free review of the movie. Then I will let you know once I will be diving into the spoiler territory of the movie. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, that will be your cue to nope the hell out. Unless you want spoilers, which I don't know why you would, but you can totally still listen for the spoilers if you want. But it will be questions that there will also be questions that I have about the future of the MCU, questions that I've seen other people bring up about the movie, and I'll touch on that as well. So, like I said on social media, my initial spoiler-free thoughts are that this movie was amazing. I fully expected this to be a great culmination of 11 years of story building, and this movie exceeded that bar that I had set on so many levels. What Endgame has done that really no other franchise has done is it respected its fans. This movie was a total love letter to the last 11 years, and they were saying, we know this is what you love, and we love this too. Here you go. And it was great to see all the characters from everything. It was great to see how much of the movie was kept out of the trailers and the teasers. There was enough shown that those who have been even semi-loyal to the MCU, they would be able to pick up on like some of the shots and have a general idea of what to expect. But there were still some things that even me, like I wasn't expecting to happen. And they happened. One thing that I have seen about how, I think it was on Twitter, someone described Endgame is that it's like a perfect finale to a TV show that you've been faithfully watching for over 10 years. But it tells a story that's new that you haven't seen before, but it also pays homage to everything that was built up to that point. I've seen people try to compare this to other movies in the Marvel franchise, or like X-Men, or even like any other superhero movie, but I honestly feel like there's nothing that has been done like this ever in cinema, which is why I feel like that TV show finale comparison is a much better comparison than comparing it to anything else that's been done in cinema history. So all of that aside, one thing that I kind of want to make clear is this isn't a perfect movie by any means. The second act starts to get a little sluggish towards the end of it, but then once the third act comes in, it came in strong. And I mean, like, my face hurt so much from all the dumb smiling that I was doing in the third act, because I've never seen such splash pages come to life in a comic book movie before. Like, it's like the perfect amount, like you know, like we've had before, you know, like the circle shot in the first Avengers movie, and at the end of Age of Ultron when they're fighting off all those AI bot things, or the airport brawl in Civil War. Like, those were good moments. But if Endgame were to be a comic book, there'd probably be like 10 splash pages back to back during that third act. I've seen a lot of links going around that have timestamps or scene descriptions, so be aware of that potential thing, about when to go to the bathroom. I don't recommend it. I don't recommend reading those or going to the bathroom during the movie. Just don't go to the bathroom at any time during the movie. Go before the trailers. Get one of those mini bottles of water to sip on to make sure you're hydrated and you're not overfilling your bladder. Skip your liter cola and just don't go to the bathroom. So if you're waiting to see this movie, say like some friends can't go see it yet, whatever, and you want to know which MCU films are definite watches before this one, I have compiled a list of the ones that you would want to watch before Endgame as a refresher, or if you're taking someone who hasn't seen it, like these are the definite movies you would want them to see leading up to this. So number 1, I would say the first Iron Man. Number 2, Captain America, the First Avenger. Number 3, Captain America, Winter Soldier. The Avengers, Thor the Dark World, Thor Ragnarok, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, Infinity War, and Ant-Man and the Wasp. I know that's still quite a few movies to marathon before going and seeing this one, but those are my recommendations. I won't get into why because I don't want to spoil anything, but if you're going to do a mini refresher or if someone needs to catch up, those are the definite highlight movies. Like, watch those. So this movie is rated PG-13, so if you're worried about your kids seeing it, our son is turning 10 next month, and I would definitely be okay with letting him watch this, but it's also kind of based on how well you think your kid can handle more darker themed moments. I mean, like, there's some moments of some pretty, I wouldn't say graphic violence. I mean, I've seen worse on like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or any show like that involves violence. I've seen it worse on TV. This one's not that bad, but it just, like I said, it all depends on your kids. Maybe go see it first and see if it's something that you think that they would be able to handle, and then go take them if you think that they can. So, how well is this movie doing? So, it's sitting at a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes currently, a 9 out of 10 on IMDb, and a 78% on Metacritic. Even the reviews, like, because I've been reading the reviews, positive and negative, just to get a general idea of like common themes. And the ones that are even more negative still have a ton of positives about the movie in them. So I don't think I came across a single just like completely negative review on this movie. Everyone had plenty of positives about this. The main complaint that I was seeing was people were saying that this movie requires you to have knowledge of previous Marvel movies, which, duh, I mean, they made this movie for the people who have been sticking with it for the last over 10 years. So, of course, this movie is going to have callbacks. Duh. So, this movie has been breaking box office records left and right, raking in over $1 billion on opening weekend, and is already on schedule to break the $2 billion mark after its tenure in theaters globally. So, like I said in the last episode, there is not any end or mid-credit scenes. There's just a thing at the very end. What they did with that makes sense. It was a little surprising that there wasn't any nods to like what's to come next or anything like that. But so it was surprising, but this is a close of a story. You know, this story started with Iron Man and it ended here at Endgame. Well, this story arc anyway. Like, the Far From Home is the official, quote-unquote, official end to this Phase 3, kind of like how Ant-Man and the Wasp was the official close of Phase 2. So the MCU will continue, but this, like I said, this story is at a close. And I will say that in the credits, it was nice to see the list of comic creators get recognition. And speaking of comic creators, there is a cameo from the creator of Thanos and Carol Danvers and tons of other characters. He has a cameo in the movie, and I thought that was really sweet to bring him in for a cameo as well. My final thoughts on Endgame, this is my final spoiler-free thoughts. It's a spectacular movie, and I literally cannot wait to see it again. Like, I want to go see it so many times. This wraps up the spoiler-free section of the review, so from here on out, there be spoilers. Thank you for sticking in. Hopefully you enjoy the movie. And when we do, come back and listen to my thoughts and my dissection of certain things of the movie. And hope you enjoy it. So, in this movie, there was such a perfect balance of what the MCU does best. It's funny, it's heartfelt, it's action-packed, and so anyway, so the prologue, it launched us into the home life of Clint Barton. His family vanishes in an instant, being victims of the snappening. I'm not going to call it the decimation. It's the snappening. Whatever. So, where Infinity War left us with the devastating, heart-wrenching moment of seeing our heroes turn to dust, this opener brings us to that cold reminder that everyday people were taken away as well. But then, it cuts to space. We see Tony and Nebula bored playing paper football. These kind of moments are the heart of the MCU and what I feel like they've always excelled at. And this is something, I'm not trying to make this a Marvel DC thing, but that's something DC hasn't been able to do. And like what Marvel does, it's these moments that flesh out their characters and it gives them heart. It makes us realize that these are characters that are real people with personalities, aspirations, humor, senses of humor, personality, heart. I know I keep saying heart, but that's what it is. Like, it gives them that. And so anyway, then we see Tony broadcast that message that we see in the teaser and the trailer to Pepper. And I was fully expecting her to be the one to rescue him in her rescue armor. But we get Captain Marvel as the one that helps bring Tony and Nebula back to Avengers HQ. And I'm just going to touch on Carol Danvers quickly. I felt like they used her the perfect amount for this installment, as this isn't really her story to be told. She was used sparingly, but enough to let us know that she's going to be playing a larger role in the next phase. So I thought the way they handled that was perfect. Some people I've seen, they've said that, she was used as like a Deus Ex Machina. I don't really see it that way. I mean, she was there and her powers are pretty strong. And I thought it was smart for them to have her off, quote unquote, protecting other worlds and coming back, for that final fight. Like, I thought that was perfect. They handled it so well. Then we see Tony's reunion with his former best friend, Steve Rogers. And you can tell that rift that was between them is wider than it has ever been. Robert Downey Jr. gave such a great performance in this movie. And that scene when he first returns to Earth and he just rips into Rogers for not listening to him, never adapting for the good of the many. That was stirring stuff. Like, his performance was so well done. So many quote-unquote nerd sites like to do those clickbaity articles of 10 reasons why Tony Stark is actually a villain in the MCU, and they completely disregard that he's been doing everything he can to stop Thanos. He's literally been the only one doing anything since the first Avengers movie. No one had been taking him seriously. No one was opening dialogue with him to try to help him do things a correct way, so he felt like he was the only one that could do anything. And Rogers couldn't have and refused to do so. Then the buildup of the plot to get Thanos and how the Russos had him killed off in the first act was something I was not expecting. And Rocket said it best when he told Thor, like, what did you do, after he sliced off his head? Because now they're going to have to face something that they can't punch or shoot arrows at. This is when the strength of their characters shines through, and not just their special abilities or their superpowers. Because now they have no way to get the stones back, as Thanos snapped them out of existence. So I mentioned the moments that made me tear up were, number one, the beginning with Hawkeye and his family. I got that teary-eye moment from that. The second was with Scott Lang and his daughter. Seeing Hawkeye and Banner's reaction to Black Widow's death, it wasn't really like a tear-jerking moment, but it was emotional. But the big one that I just sobbed like a baby, which everyone in my row was Tony Stark. So with how much they had been referencing the previous movies throughout Endgame, I knew that the line Rogers tells Tony in the first Avengers of how he isn't the kind of guy to put his life on the line when the time would arise. I knew that was going to come into play upon seeing the movie. I knew once he made peace with his dad, now that he's a father, he understands why his dad made certain choices. the moment that Hulk snapped everyone back into existence, and that scene with Peter, Parker, and Tony, I was about 40% of, okay, yeah, Tony's probably going to die. But the moment I knew 100% was when Strange held up his finger as to say, this is the 1 in 14 million, and Tony made that move on Thanos. I knew in my gut, but I didn't want to believe it. But just the way that he did it was such a perfect Tony Stark way to do it. And the most heart-wrenching part of it all was when Peter Parker came up and was like, Mr. Stark, we did it, we won. Like, side note, props to Tom Holland for delivering the two most heart-wrenching lines in the MCU. I fully expect that kid to end up being the next Tom Hanks. And his line made me more sad than what Pepper's did, even though her line of, it's okay, you can rest now, we're safe, was still beyond sad. And the other line that, just like kept it, the tears flowing was when Happy told Tony's daughter that his dad also loved cheeseburgers, which was such a beautiful moment and nod to the movie that started this whole thing. Then, the I love you 3000 line and his farewell message to his daughter. I literally had no more tears left to cry, and it hurt because I knew I had to cry and my eyes had no more tears, and it hurt. So, sad emotional stuff out of the way. The Time Heist, which is such a brilliant name, was an amazing way to wrap up the MCU, and seeing them go back in the time to the first Avengers movie, having Rogers have that alternate version of the Winter Soldier elevator scene, and having him say Hail Hydra was such a good nod to the comics that people were completely butthurt about. And it was so cool to see everything literally connected from the time traveling stuff. Even Thor the Dark World, which is arguably the worst MCU movie, tied into it. I loved the reference back to Age of Ultron at the moment when Thanos has Fat Thor pinned and we see Mjolnir move and it goes back to Rogers. I literally shouted, "Oh my fucking god," and I cheered. There was like so much badass stuff in that sequence. Like that last hour was just phenomenal. And then Fat Thor was so well done, seeing how he handles his failure of not killing Thanos in time to prevent the snapping, and how he copes with alcohol and food is such a very real way that everyday people deal with what they feel like is colossal moments of failure. So I thought that was really well handled and done in a way that wasn't malicious or anything of like that towards overweight people. So I'm not going to cover each and every scene, but the most popular questions that people have had with this movie had to do with the time travel. And like, one thing I laughed out loud about was they literally tell the audience that Back to the Future rules are bullshit. And then, if we were to go back in time and kill Thanos, all the people killed by the snapping in this timeline are still going to be dead. So I counted, and the amount of new timelines that the Avengers spawned in Endgame came out to 4. And those alternate universes are, number 1, alternative New York. This timeline separates during the events of the first Avengers movie. The major plot points stay the same. Loki's invasion is defeated, and we assume that Cap returned the Time Stone and the Mind Stone back to the rightful places. However, Loki had disappeared with the Space Stone after Tony Stark had a mysterious heart attack. Now, Rogers is also in an interesting position after this. He's discovered way ahead of time that Bucky is still alive, and now there's the secret Hydra cells within S.H.I.E.L.D. that now think he's also an agent of Hydra. There's Alt Morag. This one's not too big of a deal, as we have no way of knowing whether or not Peter Quill of this reality ever gets the Power Stone, or whether he teams up with Groot, Rocket, and Drax, minus Gamora, as she's now dust, to defeat Ronan the Accuser. The third one is Alt Asgard. This is another one that doesn't really have much changed in it, except Thor has a touching moment with his mother before she passes, and Jane Foster was attacked by a talking raccoon. And the last one is the alternative 70s military base. Also, not much changed, except Howard Stark got some parenting advice from his own son. All of this leads to the question, how does Old Man Rogers make it on that bench at the end of the film? So, here's my answer to that. So once Rogers steps into that time machine, he returns all the stones, and then he eventually settles down in that timeline that that we know of the MCU, and lives out his life as Peggy Carter's secret husband, which we've never known who her husband was. They've always just said that he was someone that Steve Rogers saved on that first mission, and that's all we know. So, but he stays out of the way of all these major events that we've witnessed throughout the MCU until that very moment that he knows he's gone back into time, and then he shows up at the park bench. So how all of this works was explained by the Ancient One when she was talking to Banner or Professor Hulk, and it was explained by Banner, Stark, and Scott to the rest of the Avengers. So they've kind of established their rules, and everything seems to work out for the most part in it. There's some things people still have issues with, like with Steve Rogers coming, living out his life and stuff like that. But it just makes sense. There's just 2 Steve Rogers in that timeline during that time frame, if that makes sense. I don't want to keep digging into each and every scene, because then this episode would be 4 hours long. But I feel like everything with Endgame wrapped up so neatly that I can't say there's much else that I would have wanted. They had that massive final battle that also included the Infinity Gauntlet football. It was so massive on the scale that when things finally do slow down, it was extremely much needed. It was very much needed. And all the Avengers that we've seen and followed from the very beginning, their stories feel complete now. And, I saw someone compare it to a Return of the King level of endings. There's the final battle, Tony's goodbye, his funeral, Thor joining the Guardians, Cap handing off his shield, and his slow dance with Peggy Carter. And, they're like, any of these things could have ended the film. But I feel like after 21 movies of not really ending its overall story, in order for the setup for the following phase, they really needed to wrap things up with this. So it makes sense. I'm not really sure what to expect. In one of this Facebook groups that I'm in, they had asked what I'm looking, people had asked what are you looking forward to the most with phase 4? And initially I'd said more cosmic level stuff, with Guardians and Captain Marvel, and potentially with the Eternals. But there's also a part of me that's just I'm not really ready to think about it yet. I'm not really done processing everything that happened, because but not to take away from the excitement of the next phase, because now we have Sam taking over Captain America's title, and there's potential Black Panther 2 stuff, and I'm sure they're probably going to bring in Shuri a little bit more, because I know she's kind of a fan favorite within the Black Panther movies. It's just I just want to kind of savor onto this chapter of movies that have literally taken up almost a third of my life so far. So I feel like there's going to be a steady stream of more movies coming out, and they're probably going to keep making more money. But I feel like this is concluded. This is a perfect ending. Endgame was such a perfect title for this movie because this was a perfect ending. So that's where I'm at with all of this. So I will end this episode with this. Just go see the movie. It deserves every single cent that it makes. I have rated it I posted on my socials. I even had recently started doing reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, so it's easier for me to compile all of my reviews into one place and then just kind of copy paste my snippets of my reviews onto social medias. But I gave it 4.5 pizza slices out of 5. It honestly would have gotten a perfect score had the second act not dragged out just a little too long. And I understand the importance of the second act and wrapping up specific character storylines, But, like I said, like with Thor and the Dark World, I mean, Thor, like Chris Hemsworth has already said that there's going to be more Thor. So his storyline isn't even really wrapped up. So having a focus on him in the second act a little too long with like Thor, like the Dark World stuff, and his mom and Jane Foster, I didn't really feel like that was really necessary. But like I said, the third act came in at a perfect time, and that last hour I could literally watch it on a constant loop because that final fight was just perfect. So this concludes this episode of the Scruffy Looking Nerdhurst podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and if there's anything that you disagree with, or things that you want to discuss about Endgame, shoot me a message on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at SLNH Podcast. If you like what you heard, you can follow, subscribe, leave reviews, all that good stuff. You can share it with your friends. I'm on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, and YouTube. So there's so many ways to listen. And be sure, if you want to support the show, you can pick up some merch. There will be a link in the description. I recently added an Avengers themed logo type thing shirt. And thank you so much for your reviews and your comments. It really helps me grow the podcast and get so much better. So you may have also noticed that the logo and some of the stuff like on the social medias and stuff like that look different. And that's because I've kind of rebranded. I'm almost at the 1 year mark of the podcast, and I've, like I said, kind of rebranded a little bit because I had a lot of people that were confused by my show. They assumed that it was a Star Wars only kind of podcast, and that's what they were looking for. Unfortunately, I'm not a Star Wars only podcast. I cover, as you know, many different topics, and so I figured it would be easier to rebrand and have it more of a more broad type design, and that way it would encapsulate what I cover and what I do on this show. So that's why everything looks a little different now. And also as well, the sign off will no longer be "May the Force be with you." I'm going to continue to end the show from here henceforth, and this is a perfect episode for it, with "Nerd Herders, Assemble!" So, there you go. So thank you so much for listening, and guys, this is Tyler from the Scruffy Looking Nerd Herders podcast signing off, and Nerd Herders, assemble!